Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation sponsored by the Scowcroft Institute here at the Bush School. My name is Joe Goldson. I'm a professor of international studies, director of the France TAMU Institute, and a senior fellow at the Scowcroft Institute. It is a special personal pleasure and an honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Professor Henry Rousso from Paris, and a fellow this year at the Hagler Institute for Advanced Studies, hosted by the Bush School. Henry Rousso is without doubt one of the world's most celebrated historians of modern European history and the history of World War II in particular. He is a pioneer in the ever-expanding field of memory studies, which teaches us not only about the past, but how that past continues to shape and impact our lives, as well as the course of global politics and history. One need only look at the war raging in Ukraine to measure how the past, and indeed distorted versions of it, shape the present. Professor Rousso is the author or editor of more than 25 books and well over 100 articles. His books include The Vichy Syndrome, Vichy and Ever-Present Past, Stalinism and Nazism, The Haunting Past, and most recently in English, The Latest Catastrophe. He is currently writing a book about the nature and problem of vengeance. Professor Rousso has taught and lectured on his research in many countries around the world. In this country, he has taught at Harvard University, Yale University, Columbia University, and as noted earlier, we are delighted to have Dr. Rousso here as a Hagler Fellow at Texas A&M University. To introduce Henry Rousso to you as simply a distinguished academic historian would be to vastly underestimate all that he has accomplished in his distinguished career. He regularly appears in the French and international media to discuss all matters related to the present and recent past. Among many other activities, he has reported on historic trials for crimes against humanity, conducted government investigations on Holocaust denialism in French universities, and visited and written eloquently about the 1994 genocide of the Rwandan Tutsis by the Hutu majority. Expanding his repertoire a bit, tomorrow night here, Dr. Rousso will talk about the French presidential elections that concluded yesterday with the election of Emmanuel Macron to a second term as president. In 2019, Henry Rousso was asked by President Macron to chair a government commission to develop plans for a French National Museum memorial on the history of terrorism. The museum memorial will be completed in 2026, hopefully, and will be the first museum of its kind in the world. Tonight, Dr. Rousso will talk about the museum, its conception and development, as well as the enormous difficulties involved in creating a museum devoted to such a traumatic and sadly timely subject. Please join me in welcoming Henry Rousso.
First, I have to put off this thing. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you, Joe. It's also for me an honor to speak before you, to speak about an experience which is not finished, of course. It's a museum which will supposed to be open in 2027. And first, I would like to warmly thank the Hagler Institute for Advanced Studies, and especially John Jenkins and Clifford Fry, who invited me as one of their fellows, and the Bush School of Government, which welcomed me, and especially Mark Welsh and Andrew Natius. I'm also very grateful to my old friend Joe Goldson, who invited me here for the first time probably 22 years ago. So I'm a little bit familiar with College Station, but not exactly the brain. Usually it's a center for me. So today I would like to present briefly what is this project of building a museum and a memorial of terrorism. And the first thing I will do is to present you a short film, a short video, about 8 minutes. We realized a for March 11th. March 11 in France, it's the commemoration for the victims of terrorism. It's a new commemoration, I will explain in a little bit. It's also the same day the European commemoration, for the victims of terrorism. And this March 11th, it was also a summit at Versailles with all the chief of state and the chief of governments of the European Union, because as you may know, France is presiding the European Union. And this film was done to be presented before this chief of state and chief of government. So it's a kind of a sum up of the project, which will allow me to go into some specific aspect, not to present the whole project, but to focus on very specific aspects. So I will launch the film now.
Le projet de création d'un mémorial du terrorisme en France sera mené à son terme pour se rappeler, pour se recueillir, pour faire histoire aussi.
La France a l'ambition de construire un mémorial et un musée du terrorisme. Un mémorial parce que ce qui a été fait pour les guerres du passé, notamment les guerres mondiales et les génocides, se devait d'être fait également pour les victimes du terrorisme. Un musée parce que nous pensons que l'acte de reconnaissance envers les victimes que constitue un mémorial doit s'accompagner d'un acte de connaissance et de transmission d'un savoir. C'est pour ça que nous avons l'ambition de construire un musée inédit d'histoire et de société sur le terrorisme contemporain. Le projet est porté par 7 ministères, le Centre national de la recherche scientifique, l'Institut national de l'audiovisuel, ainsi que la Fondation d'aide aux victimes du terrorisme. Nous avons également, et c'est très important pour nous, 2 instances. Un conseil scientifique et culturel qui nous guide dans nos choix, à la fois scientifiques, historiques, muséographiques, et un observatoire d'orientation dans lequel nous avons intégré toutes les associations des victimes du terrorisme qui accompagnent ce projet, ainsi que la plupart des directeurs des grands musées mémoriaux dans le monde consacrés au terrorisme, en Norvège, aux États-Unis et en Espagne. Cet observatoire joue un rôle tout à fait particulier parce que c'est lui qui nous oriente dans l'éthique de ce que sera le futur musée, un point fondamental pour la réussite de ce projet. C'est un projet ambitieux, c'est un projet inédit même. C'est la première fois qu'un musée consacré au terrorisme va évoquer l'histoire du terrorisme sur une longue période, depuis la fin des années 60 et sous toutes ses formes. Le terrorisme politique, le terrorisme régionaliste, le terrorisme islamiste, bien sûr. Pour ce faire, nous avons mis sur pied une exposition permanente qui a 3 grandes thématiques. La première, c'est l'histoire du terrorisme à l'échelle à la fois française, européenne et internationale. La question des victimes du terrorisme, de leur spécificité.
Un souffle, forcément. Du bruit, après des cris. Du sang.
J'étais persuadé, moi, à partir du moment où ils sont rentrés dans mon bâtiment, que j'allais mourir, que cette journée était la dernière pour moi.
C'était impensable, réfutable. Je refuse, je recule, je ne connais pas, je ne veux pas.
On ne peut pas imposer ses idées par la violence. Donc c'est le principe même du vivre ensemble, de la démocratie.
Ça ne sert à rien de développer des sentiments de haine, d'agressivité, de violence. Tout ça, c'est extrêmement négatif.
Se reconstruire après ça, c'est tout réécrire. C'est repartir de zéro. C'est comme si vous étiez un petit enfant dans un corps d'adulte, avec la souffrance pour démarrage.
Mais moi, je suis Hélène et je suis pas juste une victime de terrorisme. C'est pas ça qui m'identifie. C'est tout. Et aujourd'hui, de tout mettre ensemble et de découvrir mon intérieur et mon âme, si on veut, c'est miraculeux.
Des terroristes essayent de déstabiliser nos démocraties, nos valeurs. Donc la solidarité nationale est à mon sens la seule réponse par rapport aux victimes qu'une démocratie peut apporter.
Et une troisième partie qui s'ouvre sur l'extérieur, qui est la question de la réaction des sociétés face au terrorisme en France, en Europe et dans le monde. Les collections du futur musée mémorial sont originales. Elles sont composées à la fois de témoignages, de documents d'archives, d'objets qui nous sont donnés par des associations de victimes ou des victimes, ainsi que par les scellés judiciaires, c'est-à-dire les pièces à conviction de procès définitivement clos qui sont versées au musée à des fins d'exposition. C'est sans doute la première fois que dans un musée, nous allons avoir une telle collection de scellés judiciaires qui permettent d'aller au plus près à la fois de l'attentat, des réactions, de l'enquête policière, de l'enquête judiciaire et de ses conséquences.
Le musée mémorial du terrorisme est conçu comme un lieu d'accueil pour toutes les victimes, leurs proches, leurs familles et les associations qui les accompagnent. C'est un lieu où seront inscrits tous les noms des victimes décédées en France depuis 1974 et des victimes françaises à l'étranger. Ce sera aussi un lieu de commémoration, celle du 11 mars, date française et européenne, et de toutes les autres commémorations que les victimes voudront célébrer. Le musée mémorial du terrorisme sera aussi un lieu de transmission, de formation, de pédagogie. C'est essentiel de comprendre le travail de tous ceux qui interviennent sur la scène d'un attentat, les aidants de première ligne, les primo-intervenants, les forces de secours, les forces de police, de gendarmerie, et bien évidemment aussi les magistrats. C'est un lieu ouvert à tous les publics, mais en particulier les publics scolaires. Aujourd'hui déjà, une exposition est en cours de construction avec des collégiens, des lycéens, sur la thématique « Faire face au terrorisme ».
Cette première manifestation prévue en 2023 montre à quel point la jeunesse aujourd'hui est à la fois passionnée par ce sujet, inquiète, mais aussi offre une promesse d'avenir. Le musée mémorial s'adresse à tous les publics. Il s'adresse à tous les publics à la fois pour essayer de comprendre ce qu'a été le phénomène terroriste et aussi pour l'appréhender, pour le mettre à distance, d'une certaine manière pour conjurer la sidération que provoquent les attentats. C'est donc aussi un lieu d'espoir. Le site choisi pour implanter le futur musée mémorial du terrorisme est une ancienne école de plein air qui a été construite en 1935 à proximité du mémorial de la France combattante sur le Mont Valérien. Pour nous, c'est une chance et un symbole, car ça signifie à la fois un lieu de résilience et un lieu de résistance. Résilience parce que nous nous inscrivons dans une forme de continuité, puisque c'était une ancienne école de plein air destinée à accueillir des enfants à la santé fragile, installés dans un lieu proprement magnifique, exceptionnel. Et puis la résistance parce qu'évidemment la proximité du mémorial de la France combattante montre à quel point l'idée même de construire un musée mémorial alors que la France et l'Europe et le monde sont encore touchés par des actes terroristes est une forme de résistance par la culture. Oh, you know the main purpose of the project. Now I would like to raise and try to answer to some questions which are usually the question people are asking us. And the first one is why? Why are you doing a memorial and a museum on such a topic? It reminds me, a colleague of mine, she was in France, but she's working at the United States Holocaust Memorial and Museum. And I said, I have this project. What a museum of terrorism, what a crazy idea. Yes, probably it's a crazy idea, but we are not the only one to do that, and I will explain why it could be important. So, according to the French situation and the reason of this specific project, there are two kinds of reasons. one set of reasons is linked to the history of terrorism in France or in Europe. So I won't be into all the details, but I gave you some major points. First, France has a long story with terrorism. The first bombing car was used against Bonaparte, just in 1799. So, and all along the 19th century, there were waves of movements of terrorists, of course, nationalists, and at the end of the 19th century, the anarchists. You had the same in the United States, they were the same in Russia, all over Europe. And all along the 20th century, terrorism has been a component of our, let's say, everyday life. But what is interesting, I mean, what is probably one of the main reasons of this project, we didn't realize until 2015, until first the attack in January against Charlie Hebdo, against a Jewish grocery, against policemen by Al-Qaeda, and then in November 13, 2015, how important, how dangerous, and how many consequences this kind of terrorism and terrorism as a whole could affect the French society. Then there was a kind of retrospective investment about the question of memory. Memory meaning we have to remember and we have to understand what was going on in the past, to understand the current problem of terrorism. So I gave you here, it was already in the film, since the early 70s, I will discuss a little bit about the chronology, what we call contemporary terrorism. There have been around 4,500 attacks at least. It's very difficult to have a precise numbers, and at least 800 people were killed in all forms of terrorism. And I give you here one the chart we made to indicate immediately that one of the characteristics of French terrorism that we have all kind of terrorism. We have for example, if I began with the bottom, the Islamist terrorism. We have the extreme right, the extreme left. We have the nationalist and the so-called anti-imperialist movements in the early 70s. We have a very specific thing, which is not the case in other countries like Italy, for example, or Germany, about the separatists in Corsica and Basque Country. And you could see here the difference between the attacks and the number of casualties. It's very simple to see here. You have the Islamists caused the highest number of casualties, of killed. I'm talking about the kill in a few years actually, while at the same time the Corsicans and the Basque realized probably the most important number of attacks, but with a number of casualties much more important. So this is one of the characteristics of France, and it reminds me. I was appointed by the President Emmanuel Macron, but also by the Prime Minister Edouard Philippe. And he welcomed me. I had an appointment with him. It was 2 years ago. And I began to explain him the project. And he said, wow, you're going to talk about Corsica? Yes, sir, I'm obliged to, because Corsica is one of the most important elements to understand terrorism in France. So this is one of the first set of reasons. Then you have des éléments chiffrés, statistics, which are important to understand, again, the specific place of France, especially into the European Union. So France is the EU countries most affected by Islamist terrorism since 1979. 40% of the Islamist attacks all over Europe, and 42% of the kill, which is an enormous proportion regarding the other countries, mainly the UK. UK when it was part of the European Union, Spain, a little bit Germany, and many other countries. So another element which is interesting, that the French jihadists represent 30% on the total of the jihadists coming from European Union. I mean, those people, you know, who went to Syria or to mainly Syria to fight with the so-called Islamic State. And also another information, because this is a recent research on the topic, among all European Union, you have only 7 countries who sent to Syria and other in the area jihadists. So there's a very few number of countries, and France is one of the first for many reasons. I can explain later, or you can ask me the questions you want. So, and then if we go back to the Islamist attacks, and especially the recent one, say since 2015, they represent, that I was showing in the previous chart, 2% of the total attack, but 60 to 70% of all the victims. So these are a first set of reasons linked to the history of terrorism. There is a second set of reasons which is linked to the what we call now policies of memory. You know, memory became the object of public policies. Even the word public policy of memory is a kind of recent one. I mean, in France, for example, it was used for the first time in the 90s. So I won't develop too much. Probably you're familiar with these elements, or I can answer to the question. But it's a fact that the question of memory become a major issue for democratic societies, and what I call in one of my books a democratic value, an indication to point out to what extent a country would be democratic or not. So, and especially in Europe, it was a question of the memory of the Holocaust. So there have been everywhere, in France, in Germany, of course in the United States, policies, what we call policies of redress, meaning to repair the past. I mean, we are in the middle of the debate today about the Holocaust, about colonialism, about slavery at the global level. So France is exactly in this situation. Then we have, I took one example, the question of commemoration. Commemoration is one way to redress, or one way to say that the state will do something to commemorate, to pay a tribute, for example, to the victims. And an information which is rather interesting for me, I wrote an article a few years ago about that. We have 15 national days in France. I don't count the international ones. 15 French national days. 11 of them have been created after 1993. So this is a very recent phenomenon to commemorate history, all kind of history, World War I, World War II, slavery, all this period, and especially the dark period of French world history, have been translated into commemoration, including terrorism recently. So this is one of the reasons. There is a context where the idea to commemorate the past, or even something which is going on, has become a part of the political culture. To give you an example, in the middle of the lockdown, so it was in April, exactly 2 years ago, April 2020, I was wondering if the mission would continue because, of course, of the pandemic. And then I called the Élysée, the presidency, to discuss about the project. And they said, no question, don't worry, the project will be done, and we have the money, and don't worry. Okay. And the guy, I mean, was a friend of mine. He was one of the counselor of Macron. He said, I have another question for you. You're a specialist on memory. We are thinking about commemorating the COVID. You know, you're commemorating the COVID. I mean, just wait a little bit. So this is exactly one component of contemporary culture. A catastrophe is arriving, and immediately people, especially at this high level of politics, they are thinking about a commemoration, a monument, whatever. So it's part, again, about this of the political culture. And related to that, to the question of this idea of a rising memory, the rising memory as a value, you have the question of the victims. the victims became much more important in our society than it was the case 50 years ago. For example, if I compare the way the French state and other states in Europe, I don't know exactly for the US, but at least for Europe, the way we are treating the victims to take into account their fate, their needs, or whatever, had nothing to do with what happened after World War II, where most of the victims were not exactly abandoned, but more or less ignored. Today, they have a tremendous place in the society. And to give you just one example, we have now, it's the end of a major trial against the attack, the terrorist attack of November 13, 2015. It's a huge trial, probably one of the most important trial in French history. There were 1,700 civil parties. I mean, in the French system, civil parties are mainly the plaintiffs and the victims. And there were about 300 people who came at the bar to talk and to testify, and most of them, I mean probably the 2/3 of them, were victims, and they were at the bar not to explain what happened, but to talk about what were their feelings, how they lost a relative or whatever. So the place given to the victims in a trial is a tremendous one compared to what was going on, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. And why I'm underlining this point, because the museum is exactly in the same spirit. So that's what I'm saying in this film. The reason, if we put ensemble together, excuse me, if we put together the two sets of reasons, we have this simple idea: what has been done for the memory of wars, genocide, or state violence must be done for the memory of terrorism. This is a principle of equality. If you want to understand France, you have to understand, I mean, I'm not the one who said that for the first time, it's Tocqueville a long time ago, but if you want to understand France, you have to understand the importance of equality, not freedom. Freedom is after equality. The first one, liberté, égalité, fraternité, but in the real sense, it's égalité, liberté, fraternité. So this is what happened at the president. The president decided to do something, but not just because he had in mind to do something for the victims of terrorism. There was a movement against many organizations. All of them today are working with our project. And this is interesting to underline again that this is a kind of a pattern regarding the question of contemporary memory. If you look at the memory of the Holocaust in the last 50 years, you know, it became a major issue in most Western countries, including elsewhere. And who were the main actors of this rising, the awakeness of the question of the Holocaust? Not the state. In the first step, not the state, the civil society, association, sometimes very small association. In France, for example, the whole thing about the Vichy issue and the Holocaust was the result, of course, of historians, okay, but mainly of a small association led by Serge Klarsfeld, who is known as a Nazi hunter. So, and we see here again the same pattern. The first movement, the first claim, and the first association, for example, which was created in the mid 1980s, it was done by this woman you saw in a wheelchair in the film, and she decided to create an association, and this association succeeded to change the French law about terrorism, about the fate of the victims. So it's interesting. Well, I'm talking in the framework of the Bush School, and you're talking about you're working about public policies. This is a question which is interesting about policies of memory. Practically all the time, the starting point is coming from the civil society and not from the state. Then there is a question to what extent the state is able to understand, to accept, to respond to the claim. Here, the response was immediate. I mean, the woman you saw in the film is Elisabeth Pelcet, has a post, she was a kind of a ministry secrétaire d'État, which is not the same meaning than he used, but she was a kind of a ministry in charge of the victims. Actually, she recruited me to conduct this project, and President Macron asked her, it was in 2018, Elisabeth, I need some ideas, one paper, one page, to do something about the memory of terrorism for the victims of terrorism. So she gave her a kind of a scientific committee, and she proposed all these things. A national medal, which actually was created a little bit before but was extended to other kind of victims. The French national commemoration. The idea that history should be introduced in the high school, in the textbooks, which is now the case. So if you are at the end of the high school, most of the pupils, most of the students will have at least an idea of what was the 9/11, for example, or November 13, 2015. So, and among this set of proposals, there was the idea to build a memorial and a museum. And well, I'm not just praising President, he has been re-elected, fine, okay. But what is interesting, he accepted all the proposals, and all the proposals was implemented in 2019. So this was something which went very fast. Usually a public policy took time. I mean, between a claim from the society to the vote of a bill or whatever, it took years. Here it took months. So, and this is why this project, despite the pandemic, despite the very difficult context, is running more or less in good shape. So, the last idea, it's here, but I explain it a little bit in the film. It's the will to build not only a museum but a memorial. The other way. Not to build only a memorial, but to build a museum. Usually, I have to explain it in France, because people are asking me, why do you want a museum? I think in the US context, it's probably different. You have many museums and memorials, especially on terrorism, or the Holocaust Museum and memorial. This idea to combine a memorial, then a place to pay a tribute to the victims, a companion, and with exactly, and when you will have the possibility to study, to understand, to be able to have a kind of clear consciousness about a phenomenon is a normal thing. In France, we had to fight a little bit. Everybody, especially in the political field or in the administration, they accepted the idea of a memorial, meaning a place with the name of the victims of the terrorism, no question. Okay, but why a museum? For us, a museum was important because, well, I've been working on the question of memory for, I don't know, now 40 years. And the most important issue was the fight, the controversy between history and memory. Do we have to privilege memory or do we have to privilege history? Now, for me, the debate is over. It's behind me, and I think it's behind most of historians or other scientists who are working on this issue. But with this project, I had the opportunity to do it concretely. So, okay, we will have a place to commemorate, a place to pay a tribute to the victims, a place for grieving, for remembering, but immediately at the same time, we will offer to the visitors, including the victims or their relatives, to have the possibility to understand what was the question of terrorism. And there are three reasons, actually. Two are here. First, I mentioned it before, it's a major issue in French history and in French present times. I mean, the question of terrorism, it's an everyday question. But it's poorly known. I mean, I discovered myself as a historian when I began to study the topic, that I didn't really understand what was going on, and I didn't have a clear idea of what was the history of terrorism. So it's a way, building a memorial, to offer to the public, to the visitors, a way to understand this phenomenon. Then, and this is the major claim from the victims, we need a place to understand, because a terrorist attack, usually it's meaningless. People who are victims of a terrorist attack in the middle of the street in New York, in Paris, in Madrid, in London, they don't understand what's going on, and it's probably 80% of the trauma they endured afterwards. So the idea to try to provide a narrative, a historical narrative, a political narrative, a social narrative could be a way to deal with the phenomenon and to fight la sidération. Sideration, you use this word in English. I mean, you were astonished by the 9/11, and people were voiceless of what happened. Then, when you're voiceless, you're not able to think. If you give the possibility, not just immediately after, but a little bit after, to the people to understand a little bit more what happened, it could be something which can help to heal. And this is not my idea, actually. The idea that museums can be a way of healing, it's a, let's say, modern conception of museum. Not about museum in history, but in the question of museum in arts. For example, we have in our scientific council the former director of the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal, which she has been a pioneer in the idea that museum can help people to heal. So it's part of a reflection. So try to go a little bit faster. Here are the main museums all over the world dedicated to terrorism. Oklahoma City, the Tribute Museum in New York, which is about to close, unfortunately. A museum in Bologna, which was built in 2007. Of course, the 9/11 Memorial of New York. 2 places in Norway commemorating one of the worst attacks in Europe by an extreme right, by an extremist in 2011, and the most recent one, which is in Spain, in the Basque Country. So there are very few museums. I mean, memorials you have everywhere. You have memorials of terrorism because terrorism is a worldwide phenomenon, of course. But museums, you have very few. So here I indicated 6. There are probably 1 or 2 other. So the French project is different for very simple reason. We're taking into account a national, a European, and international approach of terrorism. It's not just a choice because we wanted to do it. Actually, it's very difficult because it's an enormous task. We have to grasp with an incredible number of terrorist attacks. There are some databases today in the US, in Norway, in Sweden. We had tried to calculate the number of attacks worldwide. It's about 200,000, 300,000 in 50 years. So you can imagine it's impossible to explain all of this. But at least it's a perspective for us. We're dealing with all forms of terrorism. I already mentioned that. And it's also an open place for the present and the future. The Prime Minister, when I saw him, he said, will you take into account the next attack? I say, yes, we will try. We will try to have a place, an open space, to take into account what will happen in the future. So it's not just a museum in history, it's also a museum of the present and a little bit a museum for the future. So what is different according to the other museums, we are not focusing on one attack, 9/11 for example, we're focusing on the process, which is again one of the difficulties. So I'm going faster because je vois le temps passer, I see time is going. So I just indicate the problem we have all the time and the questions people are asking us. How do you define terrorism? Okay, this is the huge question, and we have a lot of ways to define terrorism, and we know it's a difficult task. Here I indicate some reason why it's difficult to define terrorism. Okay, so I won't go into the details, but what I want to explain is we know that it's difficult. There is for example, no international agreement on the definition of terrorism. Each country has its own legislation about terrorism. But this is a fact for us as historians. So we don't provide to the visitor a kind of a definite definition of terrorism, we will try to explain to the visitor that there is an issue, that there is a question, and the answer to the question is different from country to another country. So this is the philosophy of the project. Not to solve the problems, not to impose an interpretation, because you have so many interpretations of terrorist attack, especially when you're talking about the Middle East. We won't try to explain it definitely. We will try to be able to raise and to shape the question for the average visitor, not just the student, the average visitor. So, okay, this is our choice. Well, I pass about. I would like to focus on another important point. What is your definition? What is your chronology? When do you begin? Are you beginning with Bonaparte? Well, we can even go back to the ancient times. There are many books on the history of terrorism coming back to the ancient times, confusing sometimes terrorism or guerrilla, and then there's such a thing. So we decided to focus for the memorial, after we discussed it with the government, on contemporary attacks since 1974. Wow, it's very precise, 1974. Why? Because there was an attack in Paris, Boulevard Saint-Germain, in downtown Paris, in September 15, 1974, committed by Carlos, one of the famous terrorists of this period, who is considered by most historians, and now by the government, by the law actually, as the first attack on the French soil, committed against innocent people without specific target since the end of the Algerian War. So when I explain that to a French audience, there are two questions. Okay, what is an attack against innocent people? First question, and then, so you don't speak about the Algerian War, which is, as you know, probably an issue in France. So I said, yes, we will talk about it, but just be careful. For the memorial, we have this period, 1974 to the present days. All the victims from 1974 to the present days of terrorism will be on a wall, on a monument. I don't know now exactly what it will be. So, and we will have also, which is very important not to forget them, all the French victims abroad who were killed in attacks. For example, 9/11 in the World Trade Center, there were four French citizens. They will be in the memorial. Then, about the main exhibit. So we are not now in the memorial, we are in the museum with this historical perspective. So what we will do is a retrospective to go back to the 19th century to explain that this is a long-term phenomenon, and then we will focus on contemporary terrorism. And well, if I have 5 minutes, I would like to explain one of the discussions we had about how to define the history of terrorism with our scientific council. We decided to begin the sequence of Islamist terrorism with 1979, which is a very traditional way to speak about the Islamists, because it's the Iran Revolution, because it's there will be the war between Iran and Iraq, and the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Well, it's a traditional cut in the history of contemporary history. Then we put, for example, one of the first wave of terrorist attacks in the 80s committed by the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah, you know, it's a group from Lebanon supported by Iran. In the scientific council, we had the former head, is now retired, of course, the former head of the anti-terrorism service officers who fought against the Hezbollah. And he said, "You're wrong. You're wrong. This is not Islamist. The reason why the Hezbollah attacked France, of course, they are an Islamist group, but the reason why this group attacked France, it's not because they were Islamists, it's because the foreign policy of France, it's because the support of France to Iraq and many other, and the role of France in the Middle East, especially in Lebanon, whatever. So then we changed, and we had to put the sequence of attacks, which was one of the worst in France, actually, in another category, not Islamist attack, but state terrorism. And then again, questions, what is state terrorism? So, and discussion and discussion. I mean, it's endless. Each time we try to explain something, we have a new box opening and then a lot of questions raising. So this is, again, the way we're trying to solve it is not to answer to all of the questions, but to propose an interpretation and to let the visitor have his own perspective. Bon, I'm going faster. I would like to show you some, what is really, really interesting is our collections. Because when we began to work, the Ministry of Culture, which is in charge of museums in France, I mean, especially National Museum, they said, a museum of terrorism, are you kidding? My God, are you kidding? You don't have anything, any object to show. Yes, madam, we have. And we have the evidences of the trial. There were many trials since the last 30 years, about 25 trials against terrorist perpetrators. They gathered evidence, what we call les scellés, sealed pieces with the wax tampon. All these pieces have been collected by the Court of Justice of Paris, and they were supposed to be destroyed. Because in the French system, you have a trial, for example, you have all the papers of the trial, they will be to the National Archives or to the local archives, depending. But all the objects, the weapons, the, I don't know, photos, I mean, any kind of objects will go to another place, and after 3, 4, 5, 10 years, they will be destroyed. And then we said, stop, don't destroy them. We can recuperate all of this, and we will make it as our main collection. And I give you some examples very quickly. This is a trash can, which was a part of this evidence, and we knew very little about this trash can. When this guy, the former head of the office of the counterterrorism in France, came to our office to have a meeting, we asked him, please, do you know something about this trash can? He came in the room, he said, oh my God! And immediately he recognized the whole inquiry they made to find the perpetrators of about 14 attacks in 1986. And just because we had this piece, which is a trash with holes, you can see the holes on the top, which was the holes to put the electric cables and to put it was a bomb actually, it was supposed to be a bomb. So, but he explained the whole thing, and what we wanted to do, because a museum, it's an emotional experience. What is difficult for us today, for any museum which is created today, what's different with a museum than what you can find on the internet, especially for the young people? Why do you bring them to a museum if they can find everything, including what I'm showing today, on the internet? So the idea is to have an emotional, a physical experience, which is the basis of any museum. And here again, it's when you see the object, you have not the photo, not internet, not on a screen, but the real object, you can have a very different perspective. So this is one example. We have many other, I don't have the time. Well, this is very special. This is a weapon, weapons who killed the préfet Claude Erignac. Claude Erignac was the préfet in France, the representative in the regions. He was the representative of the state in Corsica. He was shot in 1998. It was a shock in France because it was the first time that such a such a murder at a high level was absolutely unusual. And what is strange that the perpetrator was arrested, he was condemned for life prison, and he was killed 2 months ago in prison by an Islamist. He was killed, the terrorist, the Corsican terrorist, was killed by an Islamist terrorist for obscure reasons, not completely elucidated today. So we had this question, will this guy be both on the side of the perpetrators And on the wall are the victims? Of course not. But this is a kind of strange situation, and we decided to guard these weapons because the circumstances in which this prefect was killed are absolutely horrible, and it shows how the problem, it's not just a question of terrorism, but the problem of Corsica is absolutely not solved today in France. So, okay, so, and I would like to show you a last thing. We get it a few weeks ago by the US Embassy in Paris. They received on 9/11 or 10/11, 2001, a series of drawings by French children who sent to the embassy their reaction to 9/11. And I give you here two examples. Well, I call it the second tower. And here, for example, Bon courage, Elisa, good luck, Elisa, tribute to the firemen. And all this collection, it's about 300 drawings. The US Embassy gave it to us for the museum. So it's a very important thing because it's a kind of an example of solidarity between nations, not only and between generations. So, voila. So, and I said now to finish a few words on the site. So if you're not familiar with Paris, here is the memorial will be here. It's about, let's say, half an hour driving from the Champs-Élysées, if you want to drive, which is a very bad idea in Paris today. And then you have another, here you have a, comment dire, aerial view. On dit ça, non? Here you have the site of the museum, which is not a museum today. It's an old building which will be rehabilitated in the next year. And here you can see the Memorial de la France combattante. Well, to have a comparison, it has such importance as the Lincoln Memorial for France, because le Memorial du Mont Valérien, it's the memorial dedicated to all the French resistors who died. And then in this place, many communists, many Jews, many other French citizens were killed by the Germans. So it's a very important place in French memory. And to have the possibility to combine a visit of our Museum on Terrorism, and the Mont Valérien, it's a chance for us. Voilà, this is one of the examples of le Memorial de la France combattante. Here is la Croix de Lorraine, which was the symbol of the General de Gaulle during the war. And then we have this, that's why Macron accepted immediately the idea. On the one hand, we had the idea of resilience. This building was done for the children, for people in bad condition, with the idea that the state has to be careful about those who are weak and weaker than the others. On the other side, it's the Mont Valérien. When we speak about the Mont Valérien in France, immediately people are thinking to the Memorial de la Résistance. So we can combine these two ideas, resilience and resistance. Voilà, thank you.
So, let me ask you a few questions to begin with. Could you turn the lights down a little bit? Can we control that up here? They're awfully bright. Cassandra, are you here? Okay, guess not. Okay. What was the political reaction in France to the museum? Is this one of the issues that divides the left and the right, or the far left and the far right from the center? I mean, is there a philosophic?
Believe me or not, there was no reaction at all. When I take in charge the project, I was thinking, okay, Mélenchon will say, okay, and Marine Le Pen will say, and the left will say it's not a bad it's not a good project. So I was trying to prepare myself to all these controversies. We didn't have any I was really surprised. So the reason that it's difficult to explain what didn't happen, but probably two reasons. The first is a detail, but we were very careful with the media. We didn't go to the media every day. We didn't have a social a Twitter account or a Facebook account or whatever. Now we have a website. It took us 2 years to have a website. Not because it's difficult to do a website, but we wanted to present something serious. Not just, we will do something, send us a like. No, we were preparing this media issue, and we know that it could be very dangerous. That's why until today, I don't tweet about the museum. Very rarely. It's just when we have a very important information to give. So this is probably one of the reasons. Many people simply don't know the project. The other reason is probably the deeper reason. There is a kind of a consensus. I mean, even in the context of the election, you probably have some information about what happened in France, and despite the tremendous polarization in the French society, terrorism is not an issue. I mean, paying a tribute to the victims of terrorism is not an issue. Telling the history of terrorism could be an issue, but the report, what I was saying here, has been put in a report, and the report is very recent. We gave it to Macron, in March. So probably they will have some controversies when the museum will open. No question. And I don't know how and why, in what kind of a situation and context, but so far we were out of any controversy. Even I asked a question to my mission, and we were discussing, shall I, for example, we went to see the Grand Rabbi of Paris. We have in our council the chief of the La Grande Mosquée de Paris, the big mosque in Paris. We have a Catholic representative. It's absolutely unusual in France to do that. We are, as a country of laicité, no religion in politics. But we decided to do that because these people have very interesting things to say to us. And then we said, okay, I have to see now La France Insoumise, le Rassemblement National, all the parties. And we decided not to do it. Not to do it because, well, I presume that the result would have been...
You say not to do it, not to see these groups.
No, not to see them. I mean, if they wanted to see me, of course, I'm here and I can answer the question.
Have they asked to see you?
No.
No.
The only thing we did is to ask to the two former presidents, Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande. Nicolas Sarkozy was too busy. He's always busy, and he had many problems to solve with the justice. So he said, okay, I will receive it, but he didn't. So François Hollande, which was very important for us, because François Hollande had to cope with all the series of attacks, especially in 2015. He received us, and he gave us a lot of good advice from his own point of view as a former president. So, but we didn't see him as a socialist. We saw him as the former president. So that's it. So far we don't have problems with politics. That's it. We will have no questions.
So there is a large Muslim population, mostly from North Africa, because of the relationship between France and particularly Algeria, but also Morocco and Tunisia. They did not see this as becoming directed at them.
Not really.
Not really.
Actually, to be more precise, France had the most important Muslim community in the European Union,
right,
and the most important Jewish community in the European Union. So it could be...
The most important in the Jewish community, too.
Yeah. Yeah. So we had questions. We had questions not by organization, but I remember I was introducing the project before students of the high school. We're working with about 12 lycées, high schools in Paris and all the area of Paris. And the first question I had is about what about the feelings against Muslim? Is this project a threat to foster anti-Muslim feelings? Well, I explained not for a very simple reason. I mean, we all know that the first victims of terrorism worldwide were the Muslims, and most of the French Muslims have been suffering about what was going on. And that's the reason we asked to le recteur, it's the rector of the La Grande Mosquée de Paris, because not because he has an important position in France, but also because he's fighting Islamism. He wrote, I mean, he's very courageous. He wrote against Islamism. I mean, Islam is not Islam, of course. So, and well,
so the Grand Mufti attacked radical Islam as a dangerous thing publicly, which is
he's not the
very
Grand
dangerous.
Mufti, he's the rector. So
The rector,
he's not a religious guy, but he is very respected. He's probably one of the main one of the main figure of Islam.
Of civil society.
Yeah, exactly.
in the Muslim
So yes, I had some questions by the rabbi. Who knew me, and he said, and we have a rabbi, a woman in our advisory board, and both are saying, be careful, because the question of terrorism is very sensitive to for obvious reasons, to the Jewish population, and be careful to talk about anti-Semitism as such, not just as an F. And that's one of the things we try to do, and because, well, what I'm doing here is not exactly what is my usual job. As a historian, I'm completely free. I mean, completely, as any academic. So I have many pressure here and there. I have my bias, I have my political field, but we are more or less free to write whatever we want. Here, I'm free, but I have to think immediately about the consequences of what I'm writing, of what I'm presenting. If I talking about anti-Semitism, okay, I have to react immediately about the question of the rabbi, the question of the other side or whatever. And so it's changed a little bit the way we're dealing with the topic.
Isn't there growing anti-Semitism events in France, incidents?
Of course. This is one of the issues. And it's not, I mean, it's from the extreme right, I mean, the traditional anti-Semitism.
Well, isn't it the case that Marine Le Pen's father was overtly anti-Semitic? She's tried to cleanse, and he was a denier of the Holocaust, was he not? Or
it's worse. It's worse. The National Front was founded by former collaborationists and people coming
from the Nazis.
I mean, the Nazis, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, French Nazis. And
so the term collaborationist here may not mean as much as it does in France.
Okay, no, in French it's absolutely clear. People who collaborated willingly with the Nazis. So, and the National Front, it was created in 1972, were the first to introduce theory of Holocaust deniers coming especially from the US and from the UK.
Yep.
I forgot the name. Well, so, and they play a huge role in popularizing these theories, conspiracy theories, in the 70s. And then we had another guy, Faurisson, who became the leader of the Holocaust deniers. But the National Front play a major role. And Le Pen, the father, was absolutely, clearly anti-Semitic. The daughter, well, it's another story. I don't know exactly who she, but we saw it. I mean, it's
the daughter supposedly has cleansed the party of this, but not really.
Not really. I mean, it's the tradition. It's why Zemmour was so. I mean, Zemmour is Jewish, so it's so complicated. But the part of the extreme right was still anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, against immigration, with a kind of a violent perspective. They joined Zemmour, but they are coming from the National Front. And I mean, just wait 2 weeks, and you will. I mean, 2 weeks. Just wait the next election, and you will see the comment dire, le naturel va remonter. The very nature of the National Front will surface again, because all these people are exactly on the same pattern.
Okay. You mentioned the notion of the museum as a way of healing. It's not just for the victims themselves or even their families, but it did cause a trauma in French society, much as 9/11 caused a trauma in our society.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's very interesting in very liberal suburban areas, Montgomery County, where my wife and I and our children lived for 20 years. In Maryland, you can see the vote totals there and who wins in the Democratic primaries and all that. But after 9/11, you saw places which would never put an American flag up. Everybody had American flags up. It was a statement of solidarity in the United States because of 9/11. It was really quite astonishing, and people noticed this. Americans noticed this, and journalists noticed it. It was a change.
I saw it. I was in the States very often.
When it happened. Yeah,
we had the same phenomenon after 2015. And 2015, which is a kind of a black year, because in January, 17 people were killed, and among them, one of the most famous journalists of Charlie Hebdo. I mean,
yes.
A caricaturist, and this is my generation. I mean, I was so sad. I mean, it's tremendous reaction. For example, it happened in January 7th and 9th, and 11th, January 11th, we had 3 million people in the street of Paris. 3 million of people, simply something never happened before. And so it was a shock. And yes.
What were they doing? Were they demonstrating solidarity?
Peacefully.
Peacefully.
I mean, we did the usual parcours, from Place de la République to Place de la Bastille, which is the usual way to demonstrate in Paris. I stopped at half of the way. I couldn't go further because there was too many people. And I remember I was discussing with a Muslim young woman, and she was so angry about what was happening, because she knew that could be very problematic for all the Muslims in France, which was not hopefully exactly the case, hopefully, to my opinion. So, but yes, it's a trauma. It's a collective trauma. I mean, François Hollande, he said,
This is the former president.
The former president, excuse me, who were at that time president. He said on November 14, before the parliament, we are at war. Wow. I mean, when you say that in France, I mean, okay, it's everywhere the same, but we are at war. I mean, we did 2 world wars, and France lost 1 million casualties in World War I, 500,000 in World War II, the Algerian War. So I remember I wrote an article because I disagree with the way he said it. I don't know if we were at war or not, but I said, okay, the president is saying we're at war. So where are the les abris anti-atomiques? Where will I go if there is something in the streets? Who are the measures to protect the civil population? When you were at war, when you declare war, at least in the past, you were preparing the society to cope with the war. Here, suddenly, there was the attack, and the day after, we're at war, and nothing else happened afterwards. So, no, it was really it's still a trauma. It's and also I didn't mention it because I said there were about 4,000 attacks, but between 2012 and today, so in a decade, we had the majority of the Islamist attacks. And the thing is, it was very regular, every day, every week, every month. So after 2015, so in Paris, the Bataclan, a year after, we had Nice, which was another mass crime in France. So you have
these were not from people from other countries invading France to do these These were indigenous in origin?
Most of them.
Most of them. Now, this is very interesting. I've read that Europe does not do as good a job in assimilating populations as the United States does because we're a country of immigrants. You know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt told the daughters of the American Revolution, they didn't like it when he said it, but he said, welcome fellow immigrants to the daughters of the American Revolution. Of course, they were, I mean, but they were immigrants 225 years ago. So we are a nation of other than indigenous Americans, and so, or Native Americans. And so we have ways that evolved, not deliberately, not by act of the Congress, of assimilating populations. And so the Muslim populations in the United States are part of American society, and if you look at the data on their education level and their income level, they're actually higher than the average American. And so they're not in isolated communities, which in Europe that's more common, is it not?
Yes and no. I mean, it's common.
Is there a problem with assimilation in France?
Yes and no.
Yes and
it's
no,
a difficult question. Yes, of course. But all the studies done on the jihadists, on the French one, they're not among the poorest. They're not among the less assimilated. On the contrary. So to make a direct link between the situation of these people in the social in the society and their behavior as jihadists, it's not
connected.
Not completely
not
connected.
Completely connected. Okay.
But on the other hand, there is a problem of assimilation, mainly because of our conception of laïcité, which is a pillar of the French culture, and because France has been a target for the Islamists. For many reasons, I explained at the beginning. First, because we have one of the most important Muslim community, because
is it 10% of the population?
Yes, probably more, 12 to 14.
12 to 14.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also because many of these people are coming from Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, former French colonies, so it's different from the situation of the United States. So, and as you know, there's still a problem of this is a real question of memory, because it's not about memory, it's about politics. What is the place? And Macron actually was the one who went further about the recognition of what was colonialism. He said it was a crime against humanity. But it's not enough. It's not enough because there are still many obstacles to a complete assimilation, because we don't know. I mean, I'm going very far from my topic now, but we don't know exactly what it is today, assimilation in France. We knew that before. Now we're a little bit lost, and this is one of the problems of the left. I will say a few words about that tomorrow, but the problem of the left is identity
of the what?
Of the left.
Of the left, yes.
Excuse me, I'm tired that my accent is vanishing, but this is a split between those who are fostering identity politics, which is more or less the case of La France Insoumise, and the traditional social democrats who are universalist. I mean, it's a little bit schematic, but it's a real debate in France.
Well, that's true in the United States.
Yeah, I know. So, but in France, it's touching one of the pillars. That's why the issue of the veil, which could be seen from the U.S., these people are foolish in France. It's not at all, because it's a symbol of if we have to evolve, to change the conception of laïcité or not. I don't have the answer, and I hope, and I'm pretty sure even the new president don't have the answer too. So,
so let's open the floor to questions. I have other questions too, but Mr. Tyler.
Thank you, Professor. My question is about your discussion with other American and maybe other European experts on terrorism. Have you noticed any major differences in how terrorism is remembered across cultures or by different states? Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. We tried to do it in the first report we made. We made two reports for the president. The first was in March 2020. It was just the idea of the museum. And one of the question was how terrorism has been commemorated elsewhere. So first there is this particular thing, very few museums. So, and 3 of them, about the 6 are in the United States. So a museum on terrorism was something absolutely unusual in most European countries.
So why don't you explain that there's a Museum of Terrorism in Oklahoma City.
Oklahoma City, 2 in New York. I mean, the second one, which actually was the first one, is about to close for financial reasons. Well, I don't know. I think you have a, je sais pas, maybe I'm wrong, but you're more, it's probably easier to do a museum of history in the United States than in France. So, because in France, not because we don't like history, we love history, of course, but it's because a museum in France is mainly a museum in arts. The Ministry of Culture, for example, she received me, and she said, oh, wow, it's very interesting. I don't want it. I don't want this museum for me, because it's not a place, it's not a topic for a museum. You don't have this kind of a way of dealing with.
We have a museum for spies in Washington.
I saw it. It's one of the best I recently saw.
Yeah.
So, no, I think it's also because, I mean, all these museums I'm talking about are very recent. Most of them have been, even the Oklahoma City National Memorial has been built in 2001, in the early 21, just before 9/11. So, and differences, yes, probably. For example, well, we made a conference in Washington at the Bush School in Washington about this topic, actually. And for example, in Norway, they have a memorial for the attack of 2011.
This was just done a few weeks ago, isn't it?
Yeah, a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
And you spoke at it?
Yeah, of course.
Right. And Joe, did you speak too?
I chaired a panel.
You chaired a panel, yeah.
So it was a joint venture between the French Embassy and
the Bush
Texas
School
A&M and
you all know that we have we're not supposed to call it they call it a satellite campus. There's a legal reason for that. I'm offended by politically correct language, but.
Now, I'll give you it's an interesting question, because it's a question we raised at the very beginning. I was more or less associated to the building, to the Ground Zero project 10 years ago. I mean, they came to France, they wanted to see some experts on memory, on museums, and I encountered the woman, I forgot her name, I'm sorry, who was in charge of this project, and she presents to a bunch of experts, French experts, the idea they had. And I remember I said, well, I understand what you wanted to do, but if I have to do the same in France, we will do it differently. So, and then I went to New York. I remember it was a round table about the museum, not the memorial, the museum, which opened in 2014, I think. And they asked me to be the French expert and the bad guy. I mean, the bad guy saying, you have to criticize what they did in New York. Okay, but to say it briefly, when you look at the museum Ground Zero, I'll be a little bit schematic. No politics. No politics. Emotion, catastrophe, the building is collapsing. You have many, many images of the building collapsing. Very few elements about the geopolitical context, why 9/11, the U.S. foreign policy. Even if you're not, you don't want to criticize foreign policy, at least you have to mention it and to explain. For a French project, this is the first question before anything else. You have to define the context, the question you raise. And this is exactly what happened. I expecting political issues at the very beginning of the project. I didn't have it, hopefully, but it's still there. So I think it's one of the main differences. We can't explain history in France without politics. It's simply impossible. I don't know any even good historians able to explain history as a French scholar without being involved more or less in politics. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's my own feeling. So.
Other questions? We're out of time. I have one last question. If you did a plot of all the terrorist incidents, would they have increased since the development of social media? Has social media made this a more serious problem?
Oh yes, of course. It's we will focus on this issue in the exhibit. We have three parts, and the one of how societies are coping with terrorism is mainly based on the question of the media. Yes, I mean, I don't know if it's change in intensity, but the intensity changed with the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and you can't analyze this phenomenon without the use of the media. So there is a strong correlation between these two movements and the media. And the impact, this is even for me, one of the definitions of terrorism. You have an act It's even a small act, a small action with disproportionate consequences. A guy wanted to enter into a plane with a bomb in the shoes. He was arrested. He was in Paris, actually. I forgot all the time his name. And because of that, millions and millions and millions and millions of travelers are putting off their shoes when they went into a plane. So it's one attack, even a worst, I mean, with 200 casualties if the plane had exploded. But imagine the consequence. This is, for me, one of the characteristics of terrorism. So,
well, we've overstayed our welcome here. So thank you for coming on this rainy evening. And thank you for Henry for your presentation. Very, very interesting.